Welcome to the Men to Men podcast. I'm Malik Carey along with my co-host, Brett Carroll. Brett, what's going on, man? You looking real good, bro. You got a nice tan. Look like you. Where you been, man? Talk to me. What's going on?
I had to get away, brother. I had to
get out of this cold weather, bro.
I had to get out of the cold weather.
Well, hopefully that tan you got, bro, is going to last a while because you looking real good, man.
Well, it's an audio tan, my brother. It's an audio tan.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
What's going on, man?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot before, and this is something I'm really excited about.
Oh, yeah.
Talking about the black church. Both of us are believers. We're both in churches. We both believe in the institution, and we're both committed to our churches. Mm-hmm. And so the black church, as you know and I know, it's a critically important part of our Black American experience, our families, our history. And it's critically important for us today and moving forward. So, going all the way back to slavery and through civil rights movement, and even today, to me, the black church is the most important institution in the black community.
Yes.
So the question, my brother, is what is the black church today?
Wow, man. You know what? That's a great question. Before we can just talk about it today, I want to go back a little bit and just think about it from a place, when you talked about slavery and all of that. Man, the black church is for a long time it's just a place of refuge. It was a place where people could come and just escape the slave master and moving forward. And so the black church has been such a part of our history and the rich history that we've had for so many years that it's played such a role. And I know even in my family, I don't know if you know, I think you should know this, but my great grandfather was one of the first AME pastors.
I did not know that.
Yeah, man. So I have all of his licenses. I'm talking about from 1863 all the way through. Okay. And so, it's played a big role in my family. I have all of his sermons. I have his doctrine of the Trinity, and I've been able to rewrite some of this stuff myself.
Wow.
And so for me, it's really been a part of my family and legacy. And so, when I think about the black church, I think about it as this beacon of light.
Right.
And it has had to be for our communities from slavery till today, and how it played a role in civil rights, it's played a role in human rights, it's played a role in freedom for us. And so, I think about what it's done. It's just been such a great asset for the black community.
Absolutely. And not only that, but when you stop and think about it, the black church is where black families have come together. Mm-hmm. The black church is what has kept black families together. And we're talking about going back, like you said, way back in the day, and whether it's through the slavery, whether it's through civil rights. I grew up in the black church, mm-hmm. as most of us did. And I went to church every Sunday, kicking and screaming, Sunday school, kicking and screaming. Huh? But you know what? As a kid, that's all I knew. Church is what I knew, and I love sports, but I couldn't play ball
unless I went to church. I couldn't go out during the week unless I went to church.
I couldn't do anything unless I went to church, unless I went to Sunday school. I was a choir boy. I participated in Sunday school. The whole nine.
No wonder you're a rebel.
the whole nine. So to me personally, the black church is fundamentally the most important institution to me in my life. And even today at my age, having gone through several churches, several different types of churches, to me, the black church is more important, in my opinion, it's more important to the black community than anything.
No, I totally agree. It has played, when I think about the black church, I think about the black church as it's played a part in, like you said, keeping a family together. And let's focus on the family for a while. It was a place where, you could go into grandma's house and you saw Black Jesus on the wall, and mm-hmm. you saw, we sat together and we prayed at the table together, right. And we, there was a collective. It was really a collective. It was a family thing.
Absolutely.
You went to grandma's house on Sunday after dinner. And, I think that is missing today, if you bring it back to today, there was not the high divorce rates. Grandma and grandma stuck together through thick and thin. It was a lot of that, even though, I looked at my family and everyone was on their second marriage, but when they found God and they found that, they stayed together.
Yeah.
And, I remember that a church experience of, you went to church on Sunday and then you went to grandma's house and your grandma made chicken and dumplings, and, we talked about the sermon, we talked about the pastor, we talked about what was going on. And so when I look at that in the community, it was a part of the community, selling the chicken dinners to build a new playground or whatever it has been. It was such a vital part of our foundation. It was a foundational for us as a people, but it was a foundation for the community as well. And so, when I think about that, I'm thinking about the aspect from a family aspect, a political aspect. It was a community aspect, and so when I think about those three things, I'm thinking about the Black church being a role where, it wasn't just about the pastor, it was about the deacons, and it was about the usher board, and it was about the choir, and it was about all of those things that allowed the church to form such a pivotal part of our lives.
Well, that's what I mean when I say institution. You talked about the pastor, you talked about the deacon, you talked about the leadership, you talked about the choir, you talked about the praise and worship and the music and all that. That's what made it an institution to me. Mm-hmm. So you have my family, you have your family, you have that family, this family, and that family. We all go to church on Sundays. We all meet each other on Sundays. My family's in this row, your family's in that row. And the church brought families together. Yes. And therefore, back then anyway, families created communities and they were bred by the church. It ain't like that anymore. And we can get into why that is a little bit later, but that's where in my mind anyway, that's where, that's the biggest difference between Black families in the Black community today versus Black families in the Black community
back then.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really important to differentiate now and then too. I mean, because then it was there was more cohesion. It was definitely more. And again, I think that many Black Americans think that predominantly the Black churches should have a greater role in society than they do right now, that they haven't stepped up. It's been more about the sermon, get them in, get them out. But then back then it was, hey, one of the things we could laugh about was, on Sunday, you went to church at, 9:00. Me and I got home till 5.
You didn't get home till Monday morning. Right. He didn't get home until it was time to get ready for school the next day. You know what I'm saying? So when we think about that, it kept us unified, yep. Right? It kept us in a place of, we dealt with political aspect. We dealt with, I grew up at a really great church, a lot of social justice issues. We dealt, I grew up in one of the more predominantly Black churches in North New Jersey, the first Black church, Bethany Baptist Church. We dealt with a lot of social justice issues. We dealt with a lot of issues that were at the forefront of society. And that was really something that was powerful. That's pretty interesting that you say that, because I'm looking at it from a slightly different perspective, and thank God that you had that kind of experience in the church that you grew up in. I remember the quote unquote traditional Black church having such a heavy focus on basically the visitation and the presence of the Holy Spirit, and I remember. The Black church having such a heavy focus on the charisma and the personality and the image and I don't want to use the word prestige, but clearly the personality and the image of the pastor. The Black church, to me, the quote unquote traditional Black church is heavily focused on the pastor, heavily focused on devotions and praise and worship and the choir and the music and all of that, which was great. And the reason why I bring this up is because this is how I was. This was my experience in the Black church. We learned about God. We learned about the beginning. We learned about who Jesus was and who Jesus is and what Jesus did for us. And we learned about how to be, I know people are going to not be all that comfortable with me saying this, but we learned how to be quote unquote religious. Mm-hmm. We learned how to think. Mm-hmm. We're told how to think. We're told how to feel. We were told how to act. We were told how to behave. We were told what we could wear, what we couldn't wear. We were told what was proper, what was improper. And I say this in a loving way, in a caring way. I say this in a appreciative way. We were little Christian soldiers, so to speak. And here's the reason why I say that. It wasn't until I was, I don't know, my 40s maybe, mm-hmm. when I really learned that it's about a relationship with Christ and not about
a relationship with the pastor.
Or it wasn't about religion or institutional religion.
Yeah. And that's why I think the non-denominational movement started to come about. But I do want to talk about that a little bit. You know, I grew up around a lot of social justice. The church I grew up in there was a lot of social issues. You know, they always say, you know, definitely heavenly, theologically sound, very theologically sound, you know, doctrinal sound, you know, what we dealt with, and educational. That was another thing with the black church. I mean, listen, you know, I wouldn't have my education today if it wasn't for the black church. I remember getting that $500 scholarship to go to Essex County College and to do the things that I needed to do. And so when I think about the black church, it was involved in every aspect of your life. You know, it really was intertwined with the education, the family, that aspect, the social aspect. And you're right. I think we're so right about the one thing about we were not taught about relationship.
Yeah, but you know what?
But we were taught. I mean, I do want to say this before not to cut you off. We were taught morality and we were taught morals that, to me, were important.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to what I said. We're taught right from wrong, mm-hmm. what to do, what not to do, how to think. As a Christian, here's how you think, and here's what you shouldn't be thinking about. Here's what you do, here's what you shouldn't be doing. Here's how you act, here's what you shouldn't act. You know, you can have emotions, but it needs to be targeted, so to speak. You know, you're emotional about this, but not emotional about that. I really want to get into what you just said, that you grew up in a church that was social, that took on social issues. I grew up in a church that was completely different.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And let me talk about that for a minute. And I don't look at this as a criticism. I don't look at this as a negative, but I do. When I came to North Jersey and I started coming to the churches up here, which is where you're from, they did take on a more political stance. And so I grew up in Central Jersey. And I don't know if it has anything at all to do with either the church itself or the region that I was in. I have no idea, but I do know that we didn't deal with social issues. We didn't deal with the police brutality stuff. We didn't, and when I grew up in the turbulent civil rights movement. And in our church, we talked about the healing process. And in our church, we talked about how we can shield ourselves and protect ourselves, but we didn't talk about being proactive. We didn't talk about going into the community and impacting the community. We talked about coming into the church and protecting ourselves in the four walls. And again, I'm not being critical. I'm just amazed at how different things were. The other thing that I think is really distinctive is that I wasn't growing up. And I'm talking about as a kid, I'm talking about in my teen years, I'm talking about even in by the time I was at early 20s, I was no longer in the church I grew up in. We were not taught to be disciples. Mm. We were not taught to be soldiers. We were taught to be Christians. Mm-hmm. And so I turned 40-ish when I first learned. That's the first time I learned that as Christians, we were created to be disciples. What's a disciple? What's a disciple? I don't know anything about discipleship. What's a Christian soldier? What? I don't know anything about being a Christian soldier. And to your point, and then there's this other thing that my good friend who's a pastor always talks about, kingdom building. His whole thing, his entire thing is all about we as believers are here for the purpose of building the kingdom. I never heard about none of this stuff, man, until I was in my 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Wow.
And now I say that, but I also go back and say, I had a great time in church. I loved it. I loved what it stood for. I loved what it meant. I loved the family aspect, the community aspect. But what I'm saying is, I didn't realize that there was so much more to being a believer. I didn't realize there was so much more to what the responsibilities of a believer is until I got into my 40s, 50s, and 60s.
Oh, wow. Well, I think that may have been that you were just growing in your faith. Maybe, and you were searching it out more. Now, for me, again, I learned, I didn't learn about being a disciple or any of those things either until later on in life. But what I did learn and heard so much it was about social. And I guess that's why I'm so radical myself around social justice issues, because that's what I grew up under. I grew up under, if Martin Luther King would have been alive, he would have been at Bethany Baptist Church. Like, it was that kind of place. It was, you're talking about the first historical black church in the city of Newark. And so that was a place, and I stayed there for 30 years. So, I've been fortunate to only be in two churches in my whole life. I mean, I visit a lot, but been a member of two churches. And so, and one is radically different today because, the church we attend today that you and I both attend is really not considered a black church. It's considered a multicultural church. But the black church, to me, is where that's where I grew up at, right? Mm-hmm. That's where I got my identity.
That's where we all grew up.
Right.
That's where we all got our
and let's talk about that too. What about the identity? Right? We got our identity coming out of there. I think that was a place where you did hear, I'm black and I'm proud. I'm a black man. I'm a black, and saw a black pastor. And we saw, my pastors wore bow ties and they were clean cut, and they were educated, mm-hmm. right? So, we're talking about, we called them doctor. Mm-hmm. So the first person before your doctor was your doctor. It was Dr. Howard, Dr. Scott, doctor, mm-hmm. right? And so you understood that. And you understood that, these were men of prominence. These were men who cared about you. These were men who literally took on the roles of that senior pastor or senior person in your life. Somebody you could look up to,
right?
And it wasn't, and I hear different stories about, and I've been able to go down south and see the black church down south, and it was different, you hear some people talk about, the pastor with the Cadillac, and I didn't have that experience. I had a real cultural dynamic experience.
Okay, so let me jump in real quick. So your experience, it's great. It's great that you had that experience, but I don't think your experience is that typical of most of us. Mm. And so, and I don't know everybody's experiences, but I clearly do know that there are some churches where the pastors weren't necessarily highly educated, mm-hmm. where the pastors weren't necessarily diplomats or dignitaries or highly affluent or highly influential people in the community. I love my pastor to death. Loved him to death. He was a wonderful man who loved the church, who loved the people in his church. But he had a different vision. He didn't have a social impact vision. He didn't have a vision of we need to go outside into the community and impact the community. He didn't have that. His whole thing was, you come in these doors and we're going to love on you and we're going to sing and we're going to shout and we're going to praise the Lord and we're going to celebrate each other and we're going to celebrate what being a church congregation is all about. So let me transition to something that you said earlier.
Okay.
Which is you grew up in a church, in a black church that was very social conscious. I think, and I spoke to you a minute ago about my good friend who's a pastor, And he talks about some of the challenges that he has, and he talks about some of the challenges that his fellow pastors have. Now, he pastors a small church in an inner city, okay? But he's also a member of a mega church that's regional. He sits on that leadership team, and they discuss challenges. So I want to bring up some of these challenges. I kind of want to get your thoughts on it.
Let's go.
So I'm going to mention three things, and we'll come back and look at each of the three things individually. First thing is the church today teaching biblical kingdom building principles? We'll come back and talk about that. Number two, is the church relevant today and significant in the community? That's number two. Number three, is the church more interested in surviving as an institution as opposed to growing disciples like we talked about? And then finally, is the church willing, able, and capable of changing to meet the needs of the community because they believe that's a significant challenge of the church? So let's go back to number one, and I want to get your thoughts on, does today's black church teach kingdom building principles?
Well, I don't know. It depends on what church.
Okay.
Let's keep it real.
Okay.
You know what I mean? We have so many denominations out here today that are, you got the Pentecostal movement, you got the Baptist, you got the Presbyterian, you got the AME. I can't speak for the entire church. I can speak for the ones I've been to, and I do see that the church is still doing a good job of teaching biblical principles. I see from what I've seen, and you and I have done consulting at churches, so we can speak to this a little bit. We have some frame of reference that I think that the church or the preaching has gotten a lot more real. But then there was a movement that came around with the seeker-friendly stuff that wanted to just start getting people in the doors, so they started watering down the gospel. So I've seen both sides, and so I at the church as a whole, the black church as a whole, I believe, and I've seen some research that saying the black church has died out, that they don't have the same influences they used to, and the word has got watered down in the name of prosperity, in the name of, survival, and in the name of keeping the doors open. So, I think that's a hard call to say, no, every church is not preaching the word, or they are. I've been blessed to seek out some that have been really good with the word, and we're talking about black churches. So
I've been around the block a few times. You said you've only been to two churches. I've been members of several. Not that that's a bad thing or a good thing, but here's what I've seen, and here's what I've learned, and here's what I honestly believe. To your point, there are some pastors and some biblical leaders who get it, who know the word inside and out, who are able to teach it, who are able to mentor it, who are able to model it, who are able to significantly impact and influence their congregation and those who listen. And so good for them. They're great at what they do. The problem is there aren't enough of them. The problem is that church that you just spoke of, that I'm affirming, is too small a percentage of the black churches throughout the country.
Well, you got to remember too, and let's think about this. The average congregation of a church is with 50 to 75 members.
True.
You got a lot of these storefront churches that are out there, and I want to differentiate, those type of churches for the ones that your friend is a part of, and, the ones that we really got some meat to, and I'm going to say this is, my favorite saying, right, Brett? There's some pastors that are called, and there's some pastors that call themselves.
Correct.
And I think there's a lot of those in the black church who have called themselves, right? And back then the community called them. And so, that was a big part too.
But here's why that's significant. Look ahead, make your point.
No. I think that's really important when we talk about this thing right here.
Yeah, but and here's why it's so important. Those small black churches that you talked about, those pastors who called themselves, you talking about, they represent an overwhelming number of black churches, an overwhelming majority of black churches. So here's the point he's making. Here's the point they're making. Here's the point I'm making. Mm-hmm. If you, and I'm just going to throw a for the sake of conversation, hypothetical number out there. If 75% of the black churches are not teaching discipleship, if 75% of the black churches are not teaching truth, if 75% of black churches are not really leading their people, then doesn't that have two things? Doesn't it have a negative influence on those who are in church, and doesn't have a negative influence on those who come to church and visit? Somebody like me who has an understanding and says, wait a minute, I've been here for 2 months, 6 months, a year, and what you're teaching isn't biblical. Doesn't that turn me off?
So I'm going to ask the question. I love this. What if I don't even know what I need? So you got a lot of these people showing up in these churches that don't, like you said, I didn't understand discipleship till I was in my 40s, right? What if the problem is, which, to your point, is that these people are showing up and don't even know that they're not getting the word down gospel. Or, let's think about the whole prosperity movement we went through in the 90s and early 2000s. And some of these pastors, we ain't going to call them out, were taking people's money, for the namesake of prosperity.
Right.
And this was the black church now.
Of course.
Right. And so you're absolutely right. But again, if the congregation doesn't know what they don't know, they're showing up believing not in God, but in the pastor, then we got a problem. And that's why, to your point, again, that's why the black church, I believe today, is not as powerful as it once was.
And it, well said. And that's exactly where he was going with this. And that's exactly where I'm going with this. And so you have again, I'm going to phrase it this way. Too many, not all, okay, but you have too many churches that are not teaching the word, the wisdom of God, or the will of God for his people. You have too many churches that are not building Christ-like saints. And you have too many black churches that are not building kingdom building or developing kingdom building soldiers. So yeah, they're going to church. That's great. But what are they learning? How are they growing? And more importantly, what kind of fruit are they producing? So that's a big challenge. The second big challenge that was presented to me is how relevant is the church today in the communities in which they serve. Now, I know you grew up in a church that was very relative in the community. They're making the argument, I'm agreeing with their argument, that there aren't enough churches in the community that are significantly relevant in their communities.
I'm going to take that. So right now, if we look at some statistics, about 50% or more are saying that the black church is not relevant as it used to be. And that's a huge number. I don't believe it is. I don't believe that the communities that they are impacting are doing what they need to be doing. I think it's gotten worse. We talk about some of the communities that were prominent in society and communities were vibrant, and and most of these black churches are in inner cities, right?
Absolutely.
And the inner cities they're failing the inner cities, right? And we're looking at the high crime rates, and we're looking at a lot of those things. Are the people doing what they're supposed to do, and that's to go out and make disciples, to go out and get outside of the four walls of the church and go be who we're called to be those disciples, to be those pastors, those leaders that go out and say, hey, you know what? You were hungry, so I fed you. You were thirsty, so I gave you something to drink. And so to me, I think that the church has, when we think about it, is dying when it comes to the black church and the black communities, especially. The thing is, you and I, we talked about this a couple of episodes. We escaped to the burbs, and we found churches. Not either way about it, They were in the burbs. So, am I going back to the same black church? I do go back and visit. I'm not going to say I don't, but I needed more, right? I needed more. My spiritual growth needed more than what social justice could give me, because I learned that there was more. I needed more. I always say, theologically sound, great. Social justice, great. But the move of God was missing.
Right.
And so when I think about that, those are the things, as I grew spiritually on my own, that I said, hey, I needed to seek something else out, because they weren't, like you said, teaching what I needed at the growth level that I was growing at.
Yeah. And so it comes back down to being significant in the community, being relevant in the community. Are you meeting the needs of the community? Are you meeting the needs of the families in the community? And are you addressing the social issues that are in the community that are around your church? And they believe, and I agree for the most part, that most churches, again, we're talking about most churches. We're not talking about successful churches, black churches, because the successful black churches, the impactful black churches, the black churches who are hitting the nail on the head, they're doing these things. And you belong to one, and so do I. Mm-hmm. But the majority of our churches are not meeting the significant needs of the community. And so the third thing he talked about, which I thought was very interesting. I see you've been in church leadership, and I've been in church leadership. And so I understand the whole concept of, are we being institutional, or are we ministering to our people? And you mentioned it earlier, the whole concept of surviving. Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it earlier, the whole concept of growing. So talk a little bit about the challenge the black church has of being too institutional and maybe not enough of a disciple growing kind of a church.
The thing that I'm going to say, because I want to say this, the black culture, because of the black church, didn't die, right? It's kept us alive, and it's kept us going. And I don't want to seem like I'm beating up on the black church, because right. I just want to, the institutionalization of the church has not just been the black church. I think it's been across the board,
absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And so for me, when I think about that, the African American culture was planted, it was watered, by the black church, right? And so, even when we think about the music of, when we think about the Aretha Franklins, and we think about everything that was birthed out of the black church years and years ago, has stayed alive, in many aspects. But the institutionalization, again, has been just not knowing, right? We talk about the ones that have called themselves, mm-hmm. right? The ones that continue to pop up, and I think, thank God for COVID, because some of those got closed down and shut down.
Yeah.
But it has done a disservice to the communities. And again, I say it myself, you see so many of these churches, and you see so many people who are going to church, with quotes up, mm-hmm. They're going to church on Sundays, but they're struggling Monday through Friday, right? And so, we get them in the doors, we conditioned, go to church. No, it's not about going to church. It's about having an encounter. It's not about bringing your tithes and offerings to the storehouse and, to keep the lights on. Yeah, that's a part of it, but it's about to have that revelation that God is real. And I don't think that the black church has done a great job of that.
Yeah, and I think that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the church being institutional, meaning that they're more interested in surviving as opposed to serving. He's talking about the church being more institutional, and that they're a little too preoccupied in growing, I should say, growing as opposed to guiding, right? And they're talking about the church being a little more, or I shouldn't say a little more, but just being too preoccupied with entertaining.
Big time.
Versus growing disciples. And so that's what they're talking about when they're saying the living body. The today's black church is less interested in pouring into the soul of the members, and they're more interested in surviving as a church.
Yeah,
and that's the concern.
Yeah, here's a statistic. Said Black Americans tend to say predominantly Black churches have less influence than they did 50 years ago. Nearly half of the Black adults believe that this 47% care compared with 30% who would say predominantly Black churches have more influence than 50% 50 years ago, and 19% say they have about the same amount of influence now. The view is that the predominantly Black churches have less influence is more common stance among Black Americans, regardless of whether they were alive 50 years ago or not.
Yep. And that speaks to what we're talking about. So I'm glad you brought that up. So now that leads to point 4, which is the Black church willing to embrace change? Is the Black church able to embrace change? And what he's talking about, what they're talking about, is being proactive when it comes to dealing with the matters of the community, proactive when it comes to dealing with family issues, proactive when it comes to mentoring, when it comes to discipling, when it comes to going outside the 4 walls, right? Mm-hmm. Going outside the 4 walls and not just being inwardly, but being outwardly. Is the Black church today willing to embrace that kind of change and take that kind of proactive attitude when it comes to dealing with these social issues, whether it's police brutality, whether it's social injustice, whether it's poverty, whether it's domestic violence, whether it's the challenges that parents have with children, the challenges that children have with parents, the whole thing around drugs, the whole thing around sex, the whole thing around violence, the whole thing around gangs, the whole thing around just gangbanging. Now, this isn't about me trying to be negative or me trying to kill the Black church or being critical. This is about me understanding that I'm going back to what I talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. I love the Black church. There's no greater institution, in my opinion, as a Black man than the Black church. I know what it was. I know what it represented. I know what it is now, and I know what it can be. And so we're talking about things that, and you just got finished outlining that an overwhelming majority of Black people kind of feel the same way. And so what we're trying to talk about here is how do we encourage, hope, pray, and be faithful in the redirection, if you will, of the Black church, so that the Black church, in essence, could be that, what we call that city on a hill. How do we go about doing that, my brother?
We got to model it. We got to model it. Do I believe that it can change? It's a hard task. I'm not going to lie. I still believe that God is good and God is faithful.
Absolutely.
But I do agree with you when I look at the Black church and I look at the communities that they're in and how those communities are failing more than ever before. Gang violence at its highest. Black men are not showing up in church. There was a big push years ago that Black men were in the church. We don't show up anymore, right? And so if the Black men start to show up and start to get some type of revelation that they need to be in church and they need to make a difference and they need to go start mentoring and doing what they need to do. Here's one of the things that we have not touched on, but the Black woman is still in the churches and they're 4-1, sometimes 5-1.
And they have the most influence, and affluence, and the most impact positively on the church.
Right. And so
in the church,
on the church. And again, no disrespect to my Black women. I love you. Believe me. But you can't help Black men by coddling them. You can't help Black men by saying, you know what, young men, your moms, you're there, but a woman can't raise a man. And so when we think about who's in these gangs, Black women can't go out there and get these boys off the streets. Black men can, though.
Right.
right? And so those are the things when we think about a society, can we change? I think we went in the opposite direction.
We're
Right?
trending in the opposite direction. No
Right.
doubt about that.
We're trending. So it's gonna be a move of God, man. It really is. And so when I look at divorce rates, the divorce rates in the churches look like the divorce rates in the world.
Right.
And when we talk about all of the struggles and all of the things that are going on, the church is starting to reflect the world instead of the world starting to reflect the church.
And that's their concern.
And that's a huge concern. So can we change? We need to. Are we willing to? Are pastors willing to sit down and start to hear the hearts of men and women, who really want to make a difference?
And that's where it starts, brother. Right there.
And so, man, I think it's a hard battle. I think this is something that needs to continue to be a conversation.
Absolutely.
Because the black church was a beacon of light. It really was a beacon of light. And I don't see it being that beacon of light anymore. I see it being, like you said, a place where, it was when I say, I just remember it being a place of refuge.
True.
Right? It was a place that was a safe haven for Black Americans.
True.
We worshiped together. We prayed together.
We stuck together.
Right. We stuck together. It was a place where communities were built and rebuilt after desegregation and after these things. I don't see it. I don't see it in the churches that are even in our neighborhoods, and we live in some neighborhoods. I don't see the church stepping up like it used to.
Right.
And I don't know if it can change, or is it going to continue to go the opposite direction? That's a great question, Brett.
Oh, here's the thing. First of all, you have to have that vision. So we're not talking about the church you go to. We're not talking about the church I go to, because the church we go to, they're on point. They get it. But here's the thing, though. It's a huge church. It's a church that has resources. It's a church that has leadership that gets it. So when you look at, I'm just playing with a number. When you look at about 75% of the churches, leadership just doesn't get it.
No, can I cut you off, brother? You said something that has not been said. Powerful. You said resources. A lot of these churches in these inner cities don't have the resources.
Okay, but I get that, but
ooh, that's powerful.
No, but
Brett.
no,
Powerful.
I get that, but check this out though. So, I hypothetically, I'm the pastor of a small church. Hypothetically, we got 50 members, and everybody is low income, middle income. Okay, so we don't have resources. I think the key is the vision of me, or you, or whoever the pastors are of these smaller churches. What's your vision for your church? What's your vision for your congregation? What's your vision for your community? Because if your vision is one of discipleship, if your vision is one of going outside the church and impacting the community, you can do that. It takes a desire. It takes prayer. The Word of God provides wisdom. God provides wisdom. God provides the Word. God provides the truth. God gives you the blueprint. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is have that desire to do it. Mm-hmm. And you pray on it. And as a congregation, you come together and you form the blueprint, if you will, okay? Mm-hmm. The plan, if you will, for us to change how we do church, change how we minister to the people inside the church. You have a plan designed to go outside the church and to speak to the people and bring them inside and and minister to their needs. It ain't that complicated, but it does require the desire. It requires the desire.
But if I'm calling myself,
well, there you go. Yeah, yeah.
Listen, I see so many people, man, and I know some people, they just chopping at the bit to just be called a pastor or a leader in the church. And it's like, that's such a huge responsibility that you cannot play with. And so when we talk about those who have called themselves, and those are the ones we're really focusing on, because the ones who are called, literally God has downloaded the vision, put it in them, and
Okay.
so I believe that, because if God calls you to something, He's going to equip you to it.
And he's going to succeed. You're going to succeed because he
Right.
called you.
He called you.
I get you.
Right.
I get you.
But the
Yeah.
ones who have called themselves, they're in it for the glory, the fame. They're in it because, hey, I got this pastor title, and I've seen that. And not one side, I have seen more than ever. Is the ones who've called themselves and chewing at the congregation just to get the rent paid and pay their car notes and shop. I mean, I've seen that ugly side of ministry
Yeah.
too.
And here's the problem with that, though. The problem with that is that you wind up turning off people, and people wind up saying, if that's what the church is, no, thank you.
And that's what's going on.
And that's what's going on.
And that's why so many people have run really far away from that type of setting, because that type of setting is said it's done. There's this word that this popped up lately. It's called church hurt. And I say there's no such thing as church hurt, because you got hurt in the church for some people don't have nothing to do with the church. There's some.
But if you don't know any better, I'm gonna go back to what you always say. What if you don't know any better? See, there are people who go to church and don't realize that if you have a relationship with the Lord, it doesn't matter how jacked up the pastor is. It doesn't matter how jacked up the church is. It doesn't matter how jacked up things are around you. If your relationship is with the Lord, He's going to sustain you. He's going to lead you. He's going to guide you. He's going to direct you. He's going to empower you. And He's going to put you in a situation where you're good, regardless of the situation around you. Now, the other thing, too, is you could also say, you know what, Malik, you're the one. Brett, you're the one. Hey, she's the one. He's the one. She's the one. To rise up and have an impact on those around you that need to be impacted. And I'm not saying that I'm right or you're right, but there are people who God uses. God uses
Everybody.
God uses anybody to do His work, to do His will. And so when you look at these churches that are struggling to not only stay afloat, see, here's the problem. They're struggling to stay afloat. And so if you're struggling to stay afloat, how can you be a blessing to anybody when your focus and your energy and your time and your devotion, your prayer is all about keeping the lights on, keeping the doors open? You have nothing left. You have no energy to grow yourself, number one. And you have no energy to have a vision beyond just keeping the doors open. And I think that's that's the biggest problem. So I'm not being critical of the small churches. We're just pointing out the realities here. The facts of a lot of our black small churches are just ill-equipped from a leadership standpoint of view, which makes them ill-equipped from any standpoint of view to be a significant impact on their congregation or to be a significant impact on the community. Now, here's one other thing real quick, Malik. Now, having said all that, here's the other thing. There's a million small black churches out here who only has one purpose. I'm going to open the doors so that you can come, 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 so that we can get the Lord. Now,
I'll take that all day.
And that's what I'm getting ready to say. And so we want to be real clear that some of those churches with 30 people and 50 people and 100 people in it, they ain't trying to change the world.
No.
And that's fine. They're not trying to set the world on fire. That's fine. They're not trying to cure cancer. They're not trying to overcome all the social injustices and all the social evils. All they're doing is saying, we're opening the doors so that those who want to receive the word of God, those who want to be saved, those who want salvation, those who want to be discipled, those who want to be ministered to, those who want, and I'm going to go back to the point you made when we first started, those who want a spiritual community, here we are. Here we are. So, and there's a lot of them. And thank God for them. And I want to salute those pastors and those leaders in those small churches who open those doors just for those reasons, to be a blessing to your family and to my family and to that family and to that family and to that family, because they serve a purpose, because God creates different churches, whether they're storefronts, whether you're renting space in a gym or a hotel or a school or whatever. God creates these ministries, these churches, for the purpose of bringing His people to a place so that His people can receive His Son, so that they can receive salvation, so that they can become disciples. And so just want to be clear, and I know you agree with this. We're not knocking we're not knocking every single small black church. We're just pointing out that in some cases, too many churches are failing the communities that they're in. And we're pointing out the reasons why they are.
Man, you know what? That was so great, Brett. When we go through these communities, what they used to look like and what they look like today,
Yeah,
it saddens me.
absolutely.
And I believe that the black church has failed in those directions where they were so prominent.
Yep.
And it's time, it's time to step up. And the black church is us. It's
Yep.
not just, it goes back to social and economic and issues, am I going to go to a church that's struggling today? If God called me there, of course, I'll go to wherever you want me to go, but when I think about what the word of God has said, it was to go out and make disciples. It was to go out and fight those social justice issues. God was a God of social justice. I don't care what nobody said.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it wasn't, you had these two schools of thought, that, the church was supposed to be poor or the church was supposed to be rich, and I stay away from all of that.
Me too.
Right. But one of the things we wanted was, I believe that God wanted us all to prosper and not just in financial wealth, but in prosperity in our soul and all of those things. And I think that that's where we missed it.
Yep.
A lot of the stuff came around in the early 2000s around the whole, you started to see the whole prosperity gospel flourish. And it was, again, black community, but then it dwindled off and then it did another disservice because it pushed a lot of people out of the church.
Because it was false prophecy.
Right.
That's the first thing.
So, again, going back to your question, though, right? Are they preaching the word of God? Or are they preaching what they want to preach in the name of God? Right. And so, I really, really want to just be clear that, we just got such a long way to go as brothers and believers and sisters. Some days I do feel like we've stepped back in a lot of ways, man.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the good news, and there's always good news.
Give me some good news, brother.
There's always good news. The good news is that when you can't fix something until you point it out.
Yes.
So we're having discussions around things that matter to us, that we would like to see upgraded, improved, and that's why we're having this conversation. Mm-hmm. The good news is that there are those out there who might feel the way we feel. Mm-hmm. And there are those out there who might want to be able to do something about it. And so the thing is that if you're a churchgoer and if you feel as though your church can do more, should do more, have a conversation. And I don't mean storm the pastor. I don't mean that. I mean, have a conversation amongst yourself, amongst others in your congregation to find out what you can do as 2 or 3 people, as 4 or 5 men, and by all the means, include women. Minister to those in your church. Minister to those in your community. You don't necessarily need a contract or a signage off from the pastor to be a kingdom builder. I can be a kingdom builder by living the right way. I can be a kingdom builder by modeling Christ-like behavior. I can be a kingdom builder by serving others. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And if I do that and you do that and she does that and she does that and she does that, and that's done in church A and church C and church F and church Z, all in the same community, and that's done throughout communities, throughout any given region, this is how I think the black church
can thrive again.
And not just thrive again, but in fact, more so than the black church thriving, it's the black church impacting the communities they're in.
Well, I think that's what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about thriving, because when the black church thrives, the community thrives, right? When it starts to do that, and you know, I don't want to get there, you know, what it was designed to do, but I just believe that, you know, we got to step the game up.
I remember you told me a long time ago, you said, Brett, the black church, we are the black church. So I'm taking your advice. Here's the point I'm making. I'm the black church. So how I live, what I say, how I say it, should be done in a way that's godlike.
Well, that's why I said earlier about modeling it, right?
Right.
We got to model it. We flat out got to model it.
Right.
We can't be the hypocrisy, you know, that they talk about. Oh, they're a bunch of hypocrites to go to church. You know, that's the excuse. Yeah, I say there are a bunch of. I'm one way when I'm home and one way when I'm in church. No, I'm the same across the board. Right. But so many people, they get to see, oh, he's one way here, then he's another way. Malik is the same at work as he is in church, as he is with his wife, as he is on the ball court, as he is wherever he's at. And
I don't know about the ball court. I don't know about that.
But when you start to model that,
right,
you got to say, wait, no, he's that guy. Right. And then so if we model it, right? I know Brett. I know Brett's the same with me as he is with his wife and he with his children, because I got to be intimate with Brett, right? And so when we're in church, I'm not seeing a different Brett than I'm seeing in the streets. I'm seeing the same Brett.
Right.
And that's the model part, and that's where the pastors and the leaders, we have to step up, and these people have to learn. You know, the people who we're trying to attract to get back to the church have to see that, you know what, these brothers aren't hypocrites.
Right, but here's where I'm going though. I'm saying don't wait for the pastor. I'm saying don't wait for the deacon. Don't wait for the lay leader. I'm saying
we have to do it. Right. No, I'm not talking about any of that.
Okay.
I'm talking about the we. Right. We have to model it, because what they're saying is all we do is see a bunch of hypocrites in church. Right.
That's so we can't be holier than thou.
Right.
We can't look down on people who aren't saved. We can't think we're better than anybody else.
I got a story, and it's only for the grace of God.
We just have
church.
Yeah, we have to make sure that we're living our lives in a way that makes people say, okay, I want to be like that. We have to live our lives in a way that makes people say, okay, I want to partner with you. We need to live our lives so that we make people say, what can we do? What can we do? 2 of us, 5 of us, 10 of us. What can we do as a member of our church that can impact our community? What can we do to help this family? What can we do to help those teenagers? What can we do to help this struggling family? Because that's what discipleship is.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what God created us to do. He created us to lead people to Christ. He created us to act like, to be Christ-like, and he created us to serve others. That's what he created us to do.
Oh, yeah.
And so we can do those things. Good. We can do those things as individuals. We can do those things as small groups. And if we do those things in our small churches, we can change our churches.
Amen. You know, there was what they used to say, we may be the only Christ somebody sees today. We may be the only black church somebody sees today, right?
Exactly.
And so how are we carrying ourselves from day to day?
Right.
And when we learn how to do that, man, I think we can make a difference. It takes a spark. You know, it takes us, you know, the Bible is clear, though. They said the harvest is plenty and the laborers are few, right? And so we got to just keep laboring, man. You know, I really just thank you again. I love this topic. We could keep going on this, brother.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is something that we need to take up at another time and dig a little deeper, hear from other people, hear from pastors, hear from congregants. To weigh in and hear what we can do, hear suggestions from other people as to what they can do and we can do to go about impacting our communities. We got to go. Time is out, man. Close us out, brother.
It. Yo, you know what? And if you like what you heard today, leave us a comment. Again, we can be reached on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and SoundCloud. You know, again, that's Men to Men, MEN, the number 2 Men podcast. And, you know, we like to hear your feedback. We thank you for listening as always. And we're out.
God bless.
God bless.